the first time Fiona Montgomery laid eyes on Gabriel Reed. She was standing barefoot in the tall prairie grass, her boots and stockings discarded beside her, while her toes curled into the cool earth of Wyoming territory in 1875. She hadn't expected company, especially not the tall, broad-shouldered stranger who now sat atop his chestnut stallion at the edge of the meadow, watching her with undisguised curiosity. "Miss, are you lost?" he called out, his voice deep and resonant across the open space between them. Fiona felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Ladies didn't stand barefoot in fields, especially not in front of strangers. She quickly reached for her discarded footwear. "No, sir, I'm perfectly aware of where I am." The stranger dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He approached slowly, as if giving her time to flee if she chose. The summer sun glinted off his sandy hair, and his eyes, a clear, striking blue, assessed her with frank interest. "Gabriel Reed," he said by way of introduction, stopping a respectful distance away. "Just bought the old Henderson place." Fiona nodded, recognizing the name of the abandoned ranch that bordered her family's property. "Fiona Montgomery. My father owns the M. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Montgomery's daughter. Your father's quite well known in these parts." "For better or worse," she replied, finally retrieving her stockings but making no move to put them on. The grass felt too good between her toes, and something about this man made her want to hold onto the small rebellion a moment longer. Gabriel smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "I don't mean to intrude on your—" He gestured vaguely at her bare feet, communion with nature. "I was just enjoying a moment's peace. The house gets stifling this time of year." She hesitated. "You're welcome to water your horse at our creek if you need." "Much obliged." His gaze drifted down to her bare feet again, and his smile deepened. "You know, Miss Montgomery, there's something honest about a woman who isn't afraid to feel the earth beneath her feet." Fiona wasn't sure how to respond. Most men she knew would have been scandalized by her impropriety, not charmed by it. Gabriel tipped his hat and turned to lead his horse toward the creek. Then he paused, looking back over his shoulder. "I'd marry you like that, just as you are." The statement hung in the air between them, absurd, forward, and utterly unexpected. "Pardon me," Fiona managed, certain she had misheard. "Just an observation," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "A woman comfortable enough to stand barefoot in the grass seems like the kind worth knowing." With that, he tipped his hat again and continued toward the creek, leading his horse by the reins. Fiona stood frozen, stockings clutched in her hand, heart racing inexplicably in her chest. She had never been spoken to so directly by a man before, especially not one she'd just met. The audacity should have offended her, but instead, she found herself intrigued. As she watched Gabriel Reed's retreating back, she knew with sudden certainty that her peaceful life on the M would never be quite the same again. The following week, Fiona found herself thinking about the strange encounter more often than she cared to admit. Her father had mentioned that the Henderson place had indeed been purchased by a man named Reed, a former cavalry officer who'd served with distinction during the war before heading west to make his fortune. "Seems a decent sort," Thomas Montgomery had remarked over supper. "Paid fair and square for the property. Plans to raise horses, from what I hear." "We met briefly," Fiona said, trying to sound casual as she passed the potatoes to her younger brother Henry. Her father raised an eyebrow. "Oh, when was this?" "Last week, near the East Creek." "He was watering his horse." "Well, I suppose we should invite him for dinner sometime," her mother suggested. "It's only neighborly, and it's not as if we're overrun with suitable young men in these parts." She cast a meaningful glance at Fiona. "Mother, please," Fiona protested. At 22, She was well aware that many considered her firmly on the shelf. Most women her age in the territory were long married with children. But Fiona had never met a man who made her willing to give up the freedom she enjoyed at the Triple M. Until perhaps now, whispered a traitorous voice in her head. 2 days later, Fiona was in town with her mother, gathering supplies at the general store when the bell over the door jangled. Gabriel Reed stepped inside, removing his hat as he entered. Their eyes met across the cramped space, and Fiona felt heat rise to her cheeks at the recognition in his gaze. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted, approaching with a warm smile. "A pleasure to see you again." "Mr. Reed," she acknowledged. "May I present my mother, Mrs. Fiona Montgomery?" Gabriel executed a small bow. "Madam, it's an honor. Your husband has quite the reputation in these parts. Fine rancher, finer man." Fiona beamed, clearly charmed. "We understand you've purchased the old Henderson place. You must join us for supper soon, perhaps this Sunday." Fiona shot her mother a look, which Fiona pointedly ignored. "That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Montgomery. I'd be delighted." While her mother and Gabriel exchanged pleasantries, Fiona pretended interest in a display of fabric bolts. She could feel his eyes occasionally drift to her, and she found herself standing straighter, smoothing her skirts more often than necessary. "Miss Montgomery," Gabriel said, suddenly beside her. Her mother had moved to the counter to settle their bill. "I hope my comment the other day didn't cause any offense." Fiona met his gaze directly. "Which comment would that be, Mr. Reed? The one about my bare feet or the one about marrying me?" A smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Both, I suppose, though I stand by them equally." "You make a habit of proposing to women you've just met. Only when they're standing barefoot in the grass looking like freedom itself." His voice had dropped lower, meant for her ears alone. Fiona found herself without a ready retort, an unusual circumstance for her. "Sunday, then," he said, tipping an imaginary hat since his real one was in his hands. "I look forward to it." As he walked away to conduct his business, Fiona realized she was holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm the fluttering sensation in her stomach. Something about Gabriel Reed unsettled her in ways both thrilling and terrifying. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that rustled the cottonwoods surrounding the Montgomery homestead. Fiona spent more time than usual on her appearance, choosing a blue dress that her mother always said brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her chestnut hair up carefully, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face. "My, don't you look lovely," her mother remarked as Fiona descended the stairs. "One might think you were trying to impress someone." "It's Sunday dinner, Mother. I always dress properly for Sunday dinner." Eleanor's knowing smile only irritated Fiona further. She busied herself helping with the final preparations, setting out the good china and arranging wildflowers in the center of the table. Gabriel arrived precisely at the appointed time, looking far more polished than he had at their previous encounters. He traded his work clothes for a dark suit, though he still carried himself with the easy confidence of a man more accustomed to the saddle than the parlor. Dinner proved to be a pleasant affair. Gabriel charmed her parents with tales of his time in the cavalry and his plans for breeding quality horses on his new ranch. Henry peppered him with questions about the war, which Gabriel answered with a thoughtful gravity that impressed Fiona. "And what about you, Miss Montgomery?" Gabriel asked during a lull in the conversation. "What keeps you occupied out here on the frontier?" "Fiona assists with the ranch accounts," her father said proudly. "Got a head for numbers that puts most men to shame." "Father exaggerates," Fiona demurred, "but I do enjoy the work. I also teach at the schoolhouse in town 3 days a week." "A teacher and an accountant," Gabriel remarked. "Beauty and brains. A rare combination indeed." Fiona's mother practically beamed at the compliment while her father assessed Gabriel with newfound interest. For her part, Fiona merely sipped her water, unwilling to show how his words affected her. After dinner, her mother suggested that Fiona show Gabriel the gardens. It was a transparent attempt at matchmaking, but Fiona found she didn't mind as much as she should have. As they strolled among the carefully tended flower beds, Gabriel maintained a respectful distance. "Your family has built something remarkable here," he observed. "It's clear how much love has gone into this place. My parents came here when there was nothing but open prairie. Everything you see they created together. And you, is this the life you want as well?" Fiona considered the question. "I love the land, the space, the freedom of it, but sometimes I wonder what else might be out there. Such as, I don't know exactly, more books perhaps, music, art. Things that are scarce out here. The refinements of civilization," Gabriel nodded. "I understand the appeal. I've seen some of those places. They have their charms, but they lack something too." "What's that?" He gestured broadly at the landscape around them, the rolling prairie stretching to the distant mountains. "This, the vastness, the sense that you're part of something ancient and enduring." They had reached the edge of the garden, where the cultivated land gave way to the wild prairie beyond. Without conscious thought, Fiona slipped off her shoes and stockings and stepped onto the grass. Gabriel watched her with a small smile. "There she is." "Who?" "The woman I met that first day, the one who isn't afraid to feel the earth beneath her feet." Fiona wiggled her toes in the grass. "It's hardly proper." "No," he agreed, "but it's real. And proper is often just another word for constraint. You have unusual ideas, Mr. Reed." "Gabriel," he corrected gently. "And yes, I've been told that before. The war changed how I see things. Life is too short and too precious to waste on conventions that don't matter." A comfortable silence settled between them as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I meant what I said that day," Gabriel said finally. "About marrying you like that, just as you are." Fiona looked at him, trying to discern if he was teasing. His expression was open, honest. "You don't know me," she pointed out. "I know enough to want to know more. Most men want a proper wife who keeps a proper home. I'm not most men. And I suspect you're not most women." He took a step closer. "I don't want to presume, Fiona, but I would very much like to call on you properly if you'd allow it." The request was so formal, so at odds with his earlier declarations, that Fiona couldn't help but smile. "I think I would like that, Gabriel." He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips for a brief, chaste kiss that nonetheless sent a jolt of awareness through her entire body. "Then I am a fortunate man indeed." As they walked back toward the house, Fiona carrying her shoes rather than putting them back on, she realized that, for the first time in her life, she was genuinely curious about what it might be like to share her life with someone else. Not just anyone, this man specifically, with his unconventional ideas and his appreciation for her just as she was. In the weeks that followed, Gabriel became a regular visitor at the Triple M. He often arrived in the late afternoon, sometimes joining Thomas Montgomery to discuss ranch business, other times accompanying Fiona on rides across the property. Her father seemed to approve of the attention Gabriel paid her, remarking more than once that Reed was a man with a solid head on his shoulders. One particularly fine autumn day, Gabriel suggested they ride to a spot on his property he wanted to show her. They set out after lunch, the air crisp and scented with sage. Fiona rode astride rather than side saddle when away from town, another small rebellion that Gabriel clearly appreciated. "You sit a horse well," he commented as they rode side by side. "I was riding before I could walk properly," she replied. Father insisted all his children learn, even though mother thought it unladylike. And what did you think? I thought it was freedom. Fiona smiled at the memory. The first time I galloped across an open field by myself, I felt like I could fly. Gabriel's expression softened. That's how I felt the first time I saw the Western Territories, like I could breathe fully for the first time in my life. They crested a small rise, and Gabriel reined in his horse. Below them stretched a small valley, sheltered by cottonwoods with a clear stream running through it. The grass was still green here, protected from the early frosts. "It's beautiful," Fiona said. "I thought so too." Gabriel dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "This is where I plan to build my home." Fiona looked around with new interest. "It's a good spot, protected from the winter winds with water and good grazing nearby." "That's exactly what I thought." He took her hand, leading her toward the center of the clearing. "I can see it all in my mind." The house there, facing east to catch the morning sun. A barn beyond that rise, pastures for the horses. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Fiona found herself caught up in his vision. "What kind of house?" "Nothing too grand at first. 2 stories with wide porches for sitting in the evenings. Plenty of windows to let in the light." He glanced at her. "What would you add?" The question caught her off guard. "Me." "Yes, you. If this were your home, what would make it perfect?" Fiona hesitated, then decided to play along. "A library. With floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable chairs. And a piano, though I play rather poorly." "A library and a piano," Gabriel nodded seriously. "Noted." They spread a blanket beside the stream and shared the lunch that Mrs. Montgomery had packed for them. As they ate, Gabriel told her more about his plans for breeding horses, his voice animated with passion for the work. "You really love them, don't you?" "The horses," Fiona observed. "They're magnificent creatures, honest in a way people rarely are." He stretched out his long legs, leaning back on his elbows. "My father raised horses back in Kentucky. Some of my earliest memories are of helping him in the stables." "You never speak of your family," Fiona realized. "Are they still in Kentucky?" A shadow passed over Gabriel's face. "No. They're gone now. My father died before the war and my mother and sister during it. Fever took them both within a week of each other." "I'm so sorry," Fiona said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. He covered her hand with his own. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me not to waste time. Life can change in an instant." Their eyes met, and Fiona felt the shift between them, a deepening of connection, a recognition of something important taking shape. Gabriel sat up, taking both her hands in his. "Fiona, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. You're the woman I want to build this future with." Fiona's heart raced. "Gabriel, I'm not asking for an answer today," he quickly added. "Just for you to think about it, about us. About whether you could see yourself here, building something together." She looked around at the peaceful valley, then back at Gabriel's earnest face. "I do think about it," she admitted. "More than I probably should." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's all I can ask for now." On the ride back to the Triple M, they spoke of lighter things: town gossip, Henry's latest escapades, the upcoming harvest festival. But underneath, the casual conversation ran a current of anticipation, of possibility that hadn't existed before. When they reached the ranch, Gabriel helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "May I call on you tomorrow?" he asked. "I'm teaching in town tomorrow," she reminded him. "But the day after, yes." He nodded, then surprised her by leaning down to press a soft kiss to her cheek. "Until then, Fiona Montgomery." She watched him ride away, her hand rising to touch the spot where his lips had been. Something was happening to her, something both terrifying and wonderful. For the first time in her life, Fiona could imagine sharing her carefully guarded independence with someone else, with Gabriel specifically, who seemed to value her spirit rather than wanting to tame it. The next day at the schoolhouse, Fiona found it difficult to keep her mind on her lessons. The 12 students in her care, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were quick to notice her distraction. "Miss Montgomery, you said we could go outside for nature study today," reminded Alice Cooper, the blacksmith's daughter and, at 16, the oldest student. "Did I?" Fiona blinked, realizing she'd been staring out the window for several minutes. "Yes, of course. Gather your slates and pencils." As the children filed outside, Alice lingered behind. "Are you feeling well, Miss Montgomery?" "Perfectly well, thank you, Alice." The girl smiled knowingly. "It wouldn't have anything to do with Mr. Reed calling on you, would it? My ma says he's sweet on you." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "That's hardly an appropriate topic for discussion, Alice." "Sorry, Miss Montgomery." But the girl didn't look sorry at all as she skipped outside to join her classmates. Was it that obvious? Fiona wondered. Had the entire town been gossiping about Gabriel's attentions? The thought both embarrassed and thrilled her. The nature study was a success, with the children sketching fall leaves and identifying various plants. Fiona had just called them to return to the schoolhouse when she noticed a commotion in the street. Several men on horseback had ridden into town, and judging by their dusty appearance and the rifles visible in their saddle holsters, they weren't local ranchers. Fiona gathered her students closer. "Inside now, quickly," she instructed, her instincts warning her that something wasn't right. They had almost reached the schoolhouse when one of the riders noticed them and veered in their direction. "Well now, what have we here?" he called out, his voice slurred with drink despite the early hour. "A schoolmarm and her little chickadees." Fiona placed herself between the rider and her students. "We're just returning to our lessons, sir. Good day to you." The man, unshaven, with a scar running down one cheek, leered at her. "Mighty pretty for a schoolmarm. Why don't you send the brats inside and come have a drink with me and my boys?" "That won't be possible," Fiona said firmly. "Children, inside now." The students didn't need to be told twice. They hurried into the schoolhouse while Fiona remained on the steps, unwilling to turn her back on the stranger. "Don't be like that, darlin'," the man said, dismounting. "Just being friendly." Fiona was preparing to retreat inside and bar the door when another voice cut through the tension. "The lady said no, Dalton. Or are you too drunk to understand simple English now?" Both Fiona and the stranger Dalton apparently turned to see Gabriel approaching on foot, his expression hard as granite. "Reed," Dalton spat. "Didn't know this was your territory." "It's not about territory. It's about basic decency, which you've always been short on." Gabriel's stance was relaxed, but Fiona could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness in his posture. "You two know each other?" Fiona asked, surprised. Gabriel nodded, not taking his eyes off Dalton. "We served together, briefly, before he was discharged for theft and drunkenness." Dalton's face darkened with anger. "High and mighty as ever, ain't you, Captain? Think you're better than the rest of us. Not better, just not interested in harassing ladies and frightening children." Gabriel took a step forward. "Now, why don't you get back on your horse and join your friends at the saloon? I'm sure they're missing your charming company." For a moment, Fiona thought Dalton might refuse. His hand twitched near his gun belt, and she held her breath. Then, with a final venomous glare at Gabriel, he remounted his horse. "This ain't over, Reed," he snarled before riding back toward the saloon. Only when Dalton was well away did Gabriel turn to Fiona, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right? Did he frighten you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was still racing, more concerned about the children. "Let's check on them then." Inside the schoolhouse, Fiona found her students huddled together, wide-eyed but unharmed. Gabriel's presence seemed to reassure them, particularly the younger ones who looked at him with undisguised awe. "Is that man going to come back, Miss Montgomery?" asked 7-year-old Timothy Barnes. Before Fiona could answer, Gabriel knelt to the boy's level. "No, he won't bother you or Miss Montgomery again. I promise." The simple assurance, delivered with such quiet confidence, seemed to satisfy not only Timothy but all the children. Even Fiona felt some of her tension ease. "Now," Gabriel continued, addressing all the students, "I believe you were in the middle of your lessons. Very important work, learning. I wouldn't want to interrupt further." The children returned to their seats, and Fiona resumed teaching, though she was acutely aware of Gabriel's presence at the back of the room. He stayed for the remainder of the school day, a silent guardian whose presence brought an unexpected sense of security. When the last child had been collected by their parents, all of whom had been quietly informed about the incident, Fiona finally had a moment alone with Gabriel. "You didn't have to stay," she said as she gathered her things. "Yes, I did." His voice was firm. "Dalton has a mean streak, especially when he's drinking." "How do you know him?" Gabriel sighed, leaning against her desk. "Like I said, we served together in the cavalry. He was in my company for about 6 months before he was drummed out. He's held a grudge ever since." "Because you reported him." "Because I was the one who caught him stealing from other soldiers and from the local townspeople." Gabriel ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know he was in the territory. Last I heard, he was causing trouble down in Texas. Is he dangerous?" Gabriel considered the question. To a woman alone or to children, yes. To someone who stands up to him, less so. He's a coward at heart. But you're concerned. Let's just say I'll feel better when he and his friends move on. Gabriel offered his arm. "May I escort you home?" The incident with Dalton cast a shadow over the next few days. Gabriel made a point of escorting Fiona to, and from the schoolhouse on the days she taught, and Thomas Montgomery rode into town himself to collect her on one occasion. "No daughter of mine is going to be intimidated by some drifter," he declared. "If this Dalton character doesn't move on soon, the men in town might need to encourage him." "Please don't do anything rash, Father," Fiona urged. "Gabriel says they'll likely move on once they've spent what money they have." Her father gave her a shrewd look. "Gabriel, is it? Not Mr. Reed anymore." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "We've become friends." "Friends," Thomas echoed, his tone making it clear he suspected more. "Well, your friend has been asking some mighty serious questions about our water rights and property boundaries. The kind of questions a man asks when he's thinking of joining his land with someone else's." "Father, I'm not saying I disapprove, Fiona. Quite the contrary. Reed's a good man. Solid, and he looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." The observation made Fiona's heart flutter. "He hasn't formally asked for anything yet." "But he will," Thomas predicted. "And when he does, you should know your mother and I will give our blessing if that's what you want." It was the closest her father had ever come to discussing her future prospects, and the fact that he was leaving the decision ultimately in her hands meant more to Fiona than she could express. "Thank you," she said simply. Thomas nodded, a little gruffly. "Just don't keep the man waiting too long. Pride can only sustain a fellow for so long when his heart's on the line." 3 days later, word came that Dalton and his companions had moved on, heading north toward the Montana Territory. The news brought relief to the town in general, and to Fiona in particular. The incident had served as an unwelcome reminder of the frontier's lingering lawlessness, despite the territory's growing civilization. On the first Saturday after Dalton's departure, Gabriel invited Fiona for another ride to his property. The day was crisp, but sunny, perfect for riding, and Fiona found herself looking forward to being alone with Gabriel after the tension of the past week. They rode at a leisurely pace, Gabriel pointing out improvements he'd already made to his land: new fencing, cleared brush, the foundation stones laid for what would eventually be his barn. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time," Fiona observed. "I hired some good men," Gabriel replied. "And I know what I want. That makes the work go faster." When they reached the valley he'd shown her before, Fiona was surprised to see a small structure standing where before there had been only open ground. "What's this?" she asked as they dismounted. Gabriel looked almost shy. "Just a start. Come see." He led her to what turned out to be a simple one-room cabin, solidly built but unfinished. The door was hung but not yet painted, and the windows were covered with oilcloth rather than glass. "It's not much," Gabriel said, "but it's shelter while I build the main house. And eventually it can serve as a guest cabin or extra storage." Inside, the cabin was spare but comfortable, with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed along one wall. What caught Fiona's attention, however, was the small bookshelf beside the bed, already filled with books. "You remembered," she said softly, running her fingers along the spine's volumes of poetry, novels, even a few scientific texts. "I remember everything you tell me, Fiona." Gabriel moved to stand beside her. "I want you to feel welcome here. To see that there could be a place for you if you wanted it." Fiona turned to face him, suddenly very aware of how alone they were, how intimate the small cabin felt. "Gabriel, I know it's soon," he interrupted, taking her hands in his. "Too soon by most standards. But I've never been one for convention, and neither have you. That first day, when I saw you standing barefoot in the grass, looking so perfectly yourself, I knew. I've never been more certain of anything." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, his blue eyes earnest and vulnerable. "Fiona Montgomery, I love you. Just as you are brilliant mind, barefoot spirit, all of it. Will you marry me?" Although she had sensed the question was coming, actually hearing it made Fiona's heart race. She looked down at Gabriel, this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly, and changed everything, and knew her answer with absolute clarity. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her. "Yes, I will marry you, Gabriel Reed." His face transformed with joy. He stood and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, his hands cradled her face with infinite tenderness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky. In answer, Fiona rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened into something more profound. Fiona had been kissed before, chaste pecks at town socials or stolen moments during dances, but nothing like this. This was a promise, an affirmation, a beginning. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small ring with a single pearl set in gold. "It was my mother's. I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right person to give it to." As he slipped it onto her finger, Fiona felt the weight of its history, the connection to a family she would never know but whose legacy she would help continue. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." They stayed in the cabin for another hour, talking about their future, making plans. Gabriel wanted to be married before winter set in, giving them time to prepare the main house before spring brought the real work of the ranch. "We can live at the Triple M until the house is ready," Fiona suggested. "Father and Mother would welcome you." "I'd prefer to have our own place from the start," Gabriel admitted. "Even if it's just this cabin at first. I want us to begin as we mean to go on partners, building something together." The sentiment touched Fiona deeply. Unlike many men she knew, Gabriel didn't seem to expect her to simply fold herself into his life. He wanted them to create something new together. "Then we'll start here," she agreed. "Though Mother will have strong opinions about us living in such rustic conditions." Gabriel laughed. "We'll invite her to help make it more suitable. I suspect that will mollify her somewhat." As they rode back to the Triple M to share their news, Fiona felt a curious mix of emotions: excitement, certainty, a touch of nervousness, but underlying it all, a profound sense of rightness. This was her choice, her path forward with a man who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. The news of their engagement was met with genuine delight by Fiona's family. Her mother immediately began making lists of what would be needed for a proper wedding, while her father and Gabriel shook hands with the solemn gravity of men sealing an important compact. "Take care of her," Thomas said simply. "With everything I am," Gabriel promised. Henry, at 14, still in that awkward stage between boy and man, was perhaps the most enthusiastic. "Does this mean you'll be living at Gabriel's ranch?" he asked Fiona. "Eventually, yes, once the house is built." "Can I come visit? He said he might let me help train some of the younger horses next spring." Fiona smiled at her brother's excitement. "Of course you can visit. You'll always be welcome." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word spread quickly through the small community, and Fiona found herself the center of attention in a way she had never experienced before. Women who had previously regarded her as somewhat odd for her independent ways now sought her company, offering advice on married life with varying degrees of delicacy. Gabriel continued his work on the ranch, often riding over in the evenings to spend time with Fiona and her family. They developed a routine of walking together after supper, sometimes talking for hours about their hopes and plans, other times simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. One such evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, they were strolling along the creek when Gabriel broached a subject they had danced around but never directly addressed. "Fiona, there's something I should ask you about our life together." The seriousness in his tone made her pause. "What is it?" He took her hands in his expression earnest. "Children. Do you want them? It's something we should agree on before we marry." The question took Fiona by surprise, not because she hadn't thought about it, but because few men would consider a woman's wishes on the matter relevant. "I do," she said after a moment's reflection. "Not immediately, perhaps. I'd like us to have some time just for ourselves first. But yes, eventually I would like children." Relief washed over Gabriel's face. "I feel the same way. I lost my family once. The thought of creating a new one, with you, it means everything to me." He pulled her close, kissing her with a newfound intensity that made Fiona's pulse quicken. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Gabriel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "2 more weeks," he murmured. "And then I get to call you my wife." "I'm already yours," Fiona replied softly. "The wedding just makes it official." The day before the wedding, disaster struck. Fiona was helping her mother prepare the house for the small reception that would follow the ceremony when a rider came galloping up to the house, his horse lathered with sweat. "Fire!" the man shouted as Thomas rushed out to meet him. "Fire at the Reed place!" Fiona's heart seemed to stop. "Gabriel," she whispered, dropping the linens she had been folding and rushing outside. The rider, one of the men Gabriel had hired to help with the ranch, was breathless with exertion. "Lightning strike," he managed to explain. "Hit the new barn, spreading fast." Without hesitation, Thomas began shouting orders. "Henry, saddle the horses. Eleanor, gather blankets, anything that can be used to beat back flames." Fiona was already moving, running toward the stables. By the time her father caught up to her, she had her horse saddled and was mounting up. "Fiona, wait, I can't, father. Gabriel's there." Thomas nodded grimly. "We'll be right behind you, be careful." The ride to Gabriel's ranch was the longest of Fiona's life, though in reality it took less than 20 minutes at a full gallop. As she crested the final rise, her worst fears were confirmed. Smoke billowed into the sky, and through it, she could see flames engulfing what had been the nearly completed barn. Men were rushing about with buckets, trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the cabin, and the corral where the horses were frantically pacing. Fiona scanned the chaos, searching for Gabriel. She finally spotted him directing men near the water trough, his face and clothes blackened with soot. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by determination. She rode directly to him, dismounting before her horse had fully stopped. "Fiona." Gabriel's surprise quickly turned to concern. "You shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." "I'm exactly where I should be," she replied firmly. "What do you need me to do?" For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then his expression shifted to one of grim acceptance. "The horses. We need to get them further from the fire. If they panic and break through the fence, I'll handle it," Fiona assured him. She remounted her horse and rode to the corral, where several ranch hands were attempting to calm the frightened animals. By the time Thomas Montgomery and the rest of the Triple M hands arrived, Fiona had organized the evacuation of the horses to a pasture well away from the fire. Working with the efficiency of someone who had grown up around livestock, she quickly identified which animals needed special handling and which could be herded together. The combined efforts of both ranches' workers eventually brought the fire under control, though not before the barn was completely destroyed and part of the new fencing damaged. As dusk fell, the exhausted men gathered near the cabin, which had thankfully been spared. Gabriel found Fiona tending to a horse that had suffered minor burns along its flank. "You were amazing today," he said, his voice rough from smoke and exertion. Fiona looked up, taking in his appearance, clothes torn and singed, a nasty cut along one cheekbone, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Without a word, she stood and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. "I was so afraid," she admitted against his chest. "When I heard there was a fire." Gabriel's arms encircled her, his chin resting on top of her head. "I'm all right. Everyone's all right. That's what matters. The barn can be rebuilt. It's just wood and nails." They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, until Thomas approached with a leaner, who had arrived with food and medical supplies for the injured. "Quite a wedding eve," Thomas remarked dryly. "You two certainly don't do anything by halves." Despite everything, Fiona found herself laughing. The sound seemed to break some of the tension, and soon Gabriel was chuckling too, the release of laughter a balm after the day's stress. "The wedding," Fiona suddenly remembered. "Everything's at the house. The food, the decorations, is still there and will be ready tomorrow," Alina assured her. "Unless you want to postpone," Fiona looked at Gabriel, seeing the question in his eyes as well. "No," she said firmly. "No postponement. We're getting married tomorrow as planned." Gabriel's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I was hoping you'd say that." That night, after returning to the Triple M, Fiona found it impossible to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day's events, imagining what might have happened if the fire had spread to the cabin, if Gabriel had been trapped inside the burning barn. The very thought made her physically ill. Unable to remain in bed, she slipped downstairs and out onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She had just settled onto the porch swing when she heard the soft creak of the gate. Gabriel emerged from the darkness, looking as sleepless as she felt. He paused when he saw her, clearly surprised. "I couldn't sleep," he explained, climbing the steps to join her. "Kept thinking about you." "I was thinking about you too," Fiona admitted, making room for him on the swing. Gabriel sat beside her, taking her hand in his. For a while, they simply rocked in comfortable silence, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound besides their breathing. "I almost lost everything today," Gabriel finally said. "Not the barn or the fences. Those things don't matter. But when I couldn't find you at first, when I thought you might have ridden into danger." "I'm right here," Fiona reminded him gently. "Safe, with you." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Tomorrow can't come soon enough." "It's already tomorrow," she pointed out, nodding toward the faint lightning on the eastern horizon. "The sun will be up in a few hours." "Then I should go," Gabriel said reluctantly. "It's bad luck to see the bride on the wedding day before the ceremony." Fiona smiled. "I thought you weren't one for convention. For you, I'll make an exception." He stood, drawing her up with him. "I'll see you at the church, Fiona Montgomery. I'll be the one waiting impatiently at the altar." "And I'll be the one walking toward you," she promised. "Nothing could keep me away." One last kiss, sweet and full of promise, and then Gabriel was gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Fiona remained on the porch, watching as the first hints of pink and gold touched the eastern sky. In a few hours, she would become Fiona Reed. The thought filled her with a quiet joy that went beyond excitement to something deeper, more enduring. The wedding itself was simple but beautiful. The small church in town was decorated with autumn flowers and greenery, and though the guests were few, just family and close friends, their genuine happiness for the couple filled the space with warmth. Fiona wore a dress of ivory silk that had been her mother's, altered to suit her taller frame. She carried wildflowers gathered that morning from the meadow where she and Gabriel had first met. As her father walked her down the aisle, she saw only Gabriel, waiting for her as promised, his eyes never leaving hers. The minister's words washed over her in a blur, but when it came time for their vows, Fiona's voice was clear and steady. Gabriel's hands trembled slightly as he placed the simple gold band on her finger, but his eyes were sure, filled with a love so tangible it seemed to illuminate him from within. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Gabriel's kiss was gentle, reverent, mindful of their audience, but still conveying the depth of his feelings. When they turned to face their guests, now introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Reed, the applause was enthusiastic, punctuated by Henry's exuberant whoop. The reception at the Triple M was a joyous affair, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. As tradition dictated, the newlyweds would spend their first night in the bride's family home, before departing for their own place the following day. When the last guest had finally departed and the family had retired, Gabriel led Fiona up to what had been her bedroom, but was now, for one night at least, their bridal chamber. The room had been transformed with fresh linens, candles, and scattered flower petals, Eleanor's romantic touch. Alone at last, a sudden shyness fell between them. Gabriel took Fiona's hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her wrists. "We've had quite a journey to get here," he said softly. Fiona smiled. "And it's only just beginning." Their first night together as husband and wife was everything Fiona had hoped for, tender, passionate, a mutual discovery that left them both breathless with wonder. In Gabriel's arms, she found a new kind of freedom, one she had never anticipated but now couldn't imagine living without. As they lay together in the quiet aftermath, Gabriel traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," she assured him, nestling closer. "And you, more than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for marrying me, Fiona Reed." "The best decision I ever made," she murmured, already drifting towards sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and bright. Fiona woke to find Gabriel already awake, watching her with a tender expression that made her heart flutter. "Good morning, wife," he said, the words sounding like a caress. "Good morning, husband," she replied, stretching luxuriously. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in years." He leaned down to kiss her, a slow, thorough kiss that threatened to delay their departure from bed considerably. Eventually, they made their way downstairs to find Alina preparing a special breakfast for them. Thomas and Henry joined them, and the meal was filled with easy conversation and gentle teasing about their new status. After breakfast, it was time to leave for Gabriel's ranch, their ranch now. Their belongings had been packed the previous day, loaded onto a wagon that would follow them. The goodbye was emotional but not somber. Everyone knew they would see each other frequently, given the proximity of the two properties. "Take care of each other," Alina said, embracing Fiona tightly. "We will, Mother," Fiona promised. Thomas shook Gabriel's hand firmly. "Remember what I said." "Every day," Gabriel assured him. The ride to their new home was filled with a sense of anticipation. Despite having seen the property many times before, Fiona viewed it with new eyes now as her home, the place where she and Gabriel would build their life together. The cabin, small as it was, had been transformed in their absence. Alina had clearly been busy, sending over curtains for the windows, additional bedding, and various household items to make the space more comfortable. There were even fresh flowers on the table, no doubt delivered that morning by one of the Triple M hands. "It's perfect," Fiona declared as she surveyed their temporary home. Gabriel wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "It's just the beginning. By next summer, we'll have the main house built." "I don't mind starting here," Fiona said honestly. "It feels right, somehow, building from the ground up together." The days that followed established the pattern of their new life together. Gabriel continued his work with the horses and rebuilding the barn, while Fiona divided her time between teaching, keeping the ranch accounts, and making their small cabin into a real home. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, reading or talking or sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing heavy snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Far from finding the confinement difficult, Fiona discovered a deep contentment in the cozy intimacy of their cabin. She and Gabriel learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small compromises and adjustments of two independent people building a shared life. There were challenges, of course. Their first real argument came when Gabriel rode out during a blizzard to check on a mare about to foal, despite Fiona's protests that it was too dangerous. "I can't just let her suffer," he had insisted, "and I can't just let you die in a snowdrift." Fiona had retorted, her fear making her voice sharper than intended. In the end, they compromised. Gabriel went, but with extra provisions, a compass, and a promise to return within 2 hours regardless of the situation. When he returned, half frozen but triumphant after helping deliver a healthy foal, their reconciliation was as passionate as their argument had been. Spring's arrival brought a flurry of new activity. Work began on the main house, with Gabriel overseeing the construction while also tending to the growing herd of horses. Fiona continued teaching but cut back to 2 days a week, devoting more time to the ranch. The day they laid the foundation for the library, Gabriel's surprise addition to the house plans, Fiona knew, with absolute certainty, that she had made the right choice in marrying him. It wasn't just the room itself, though the thought of having a dedicated space for her books delighted her. It was what the gesture represented: Gabriel's understanding of what mattered to her, his desire to incorporate her dreams into their shared future. "You like it?" he asked anxiously as he showed her the plans, which included built-in shelves and a window seat overlooking the valley. In answer, Fiona threw her arms around him, peppering his face with kisses until he laughed and swung her around in circles. Summer brought the first real test of their partnership, when Gabriel received an offer to buy several of his best breeding horses for a price that would secure their financial future for years to come. The catch was that he would need to personally deliver the animals to Denver, a journey that would take at least 3 weeks. "I don't have to go," he said as they discussed the opportunity. "We can find another buyer closer to home. But not at this price," Fiona pointed out practically. "And not with the connections this buyer has. It could establish your reputation throughout the territory." "Our reputation," Gabriel corrected. "This ranch is as much yours as mine." Fiona took his hands in hers. "Then, as your partner, I say you should go. The ranch will be fine without you for a few weeks. I can manage things here." Gabriel searched her face. "Are you sure? I don't like the thought of leaving you alone." "I won't be alone. We have good hands, and the Triple M is just over the ridge if I need anything." She smiled reassuringly. "Besides, think how sweet the reunion will be." In the end, Gabriel accepted the offer. The preparations for his journey kept them both busy, but as the departure date approached, Fiona found herself increasingly anxious about their first separation since their marriage. The night before he was to leave, they lay awake long into the night, holding each other close, memorizing the feel of each other's bodies. 3 weeks, Gabriel murmured against her hair. "It will pass before we know it." "I'll count every day," Fiona promised, "and expect regular letters. Daily if I can manage it." He tightened his arms around her. "I love you, Fiona Reed, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow. And I love you, always." The morning of Gabriel's departure was difficult but managed with the practical efficiency that characterized their partnership. Fiona helped him prepare the horses for the journey, packed extra provisions, and stood strong as they said their goodbyes. Only after Gabriel and his small party had disappeared over the horizon did she allow herself a moment of weakness, a few tears shed in the privacy of their cabin before she squared her shoulders and turned to the tasks at hand. She had a ranch to run, after all, and she was determined that Gabriel would return to find everything in perfect order. The first week of his absence passed relatively smoothly. Fiona settled into a routine, dividing her time between teaching, ranch work, and continuing to furnish their nearly completed home. She wrote to Gabriel every evening, detailed accounts of her days that she dispatched whenever a rider was heading toward Denver. The second week brought unexpected complications. A dispute arose between 2 of the ranch hands that threatened to disrupt the entire operation. Drawing on the diplomatic skills she had honed as a teacher, Fiona managed to resolve the conflict, earning new respect from the men in the process. "Mrs. Reed handles things different than the boss," she overheard one hand saying to another, "but can't say it's not effective." The comment pleased her more than she would have admitted. Being accepted as Gabriel's true partner in the ranch, not just his wife, mattered deeply to her. Gabriel's letters arrived sporadically, sometimes several at once, full of details about his journey and negotiations, but always ending with declarations of love and longing that made Fiona blush even in private. Reading his words was both comfort and torment, a connection across the distance, but also a reminder of his absence. The third week brought disaster in the form of early autumn rains that swelled the creek to dangerous levels, threatening to flood part of the property. For 2 days and nights, Fiona worked alongside the ranch hands to divert the water and protect the vulnerable areas. Exhausted but triumphant, she had just retired to the cabin when a rider appeared, bearing news that both elated and terrified her. "Mrs. Reed," the young man said breathlessly, "there's word in town that Mr. Reed's party is returning, but there's been trouble. Raiders hit them near the territorial border." Fiona's heart seemed to stop. "Gabriel, is he alive, madam, according to the telegraph? Wounded but alive. They should reach town by tomorrow afternoon." She barely slept that night, her mind conjuring terrible images of Gabriel hurt, possibly dying, while she waited helplessly at home. By dawn, she had made her decision. Rather than waiting for Gabriel to reach the ranch, she would ride to meet him in town. The journey was made difficult by the muddy roads, but Fiona pushed on, arriving in town by mid-morning. The doctor's office seemed the most logical place to wait, and she was correct. Shortly after noon, a weary procession entered the town, with Gabriel at its center, supported on his horse by one of his men. Fiona rushed out to meet them, her heart in her throat as she took in Gabriel's appearance. He was pale beneath his tan, with a makeshift bandage around his left arm and another visible through his torn shirt on his side. But his eyes lit up when he saw her, and the smile that spread across his face was one of pure joy. "Fiona," he breathed as she reached him. "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for my husband," she replied, helping him dismount and supporting him as they made their way to the doctor's office. "Did you really think I'd stay home when I heard you were hurt?" The doctor's examination revealed that Gabriel's wounds, while painful, were not life-threatening. The bullet had grazed his arm, and a knife had sliced his side during the skirmish with the raiders, but with proper care, he would recover fully. "You were lucky," the doctor pronounced as he finished bandaging the wounds. "A few inches to the right and we'd be having a very different conversation." "I had something important to return to," Gabriel said, his eyes finding Fiona's across the room. "Motivation makes a difference." They spent the night in town, in a room above the hotel, neither willing to risk the journey home with Gabriel in his weakened state. As they lay together in the narrow bed, Gabriel recounted the attack, how the raiders had ambushed them shortly after crossing back into Wyoming territory, clearly hoping to steal the payment Gabriel had received for the horses. "If it hadn't been for Williams and Jackson," he said, naming two of his hands, "I might not have made it back at all. They fought like demons." Fiona shuddered at the thought. "I'll thank them properly tomorrow." Gabriel's hand found hers in the darkness. "I kept thinking about you. About how I promised to come back to you. It gave me strength when I thought I had none left." "Don't ever scare me like that again," Fiona whispered fiercely. "I'll do my best," he promised, drawing her closer. "Though I have to admit, having you nurse me back to health has certain appealing aspects." Despite everything, Fiona found herself laughing. It was so like Gabriel to find humor even in dire circumstances. "You're impossible, and yet you love me anyway." "I do," she agreed, settling her head on his uninjured shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible." The journey home the following day was slow but uneventful. Gabriel insisted on riding his own horse, though Fiona stayed close beside him, watchful for any sign that his strength was failing. When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked their property, both paused to take in the view. The main house was nearly complete now, its sturdy frame rising from the valley floor like a promise fulfilled. The new barn stood nearby, larger and stronger than the one destroyed by fire. In the pastures, horses grazed peacefully, unaware of the drama that had unfolded miles away. "Home," Gabriel said simply. Fiona reached across the space between them to take his hand. "Home," she echoed. Recovery took time. Gabriel chafed at the restrictions his injuries imposed, but Fiona was firm, insisting he allow himself to heal properly before resuming his full duties. In the meantime, she continued managing the ranch operations, demonstrating a capability that impressed even Gabriel. "You're quite remarkable, you know," he observed one evening as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. "Most women would have been overwhelmed by everything you've handled these past weeks." "I'm not most women," Fiona reminded him with a smile. "No," Gabriel agreed, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "You're the woman I fell in love with when I saw her standing barefoot in the grass, looking like freedom itself. And would you still marry me like that, just as I am?" She asked, echoing his words from their first meeting. "In a heartbeat," he assured her. "Today and every day for the rest of our lives." Winter came again, but this time they faced it in their new home, the house Gabriel had promised her from the beginning. It was everything Fiona had dreamed of and more spacious without being ostentatious, comfortable without sacrificing beauty. The library was her particular joy, already filling with books ordered from as far away as Boston and New York. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, Gabriel presented Fiona with a special gift, a piano for the parlor, delivered in secret during her weekly teaching day in town. "Gabriel," she gasped, running her fingers reverently over the polished wood. "It's beautiful, but how did you manage it? The expense is nothing compared to the joy it will bring you," he finished for her. "Besides, I made an excellent profit on those horses in Denver, despite the unfortunate ending to the trip." Fiona sat on the bench, picking out a simple tune. Her playing was, as she had warned him, rather basic, but the happiness on her face as the notes filled their home was all the confirmation Gabriel needed that the gift had been worth every penny. "I have something for you too," Fiona said after finishing her simple melody. "Though it's not quite as impressive as a piano." She retrieved a small package from beneath the tree and handed it to Gabriel, watching nervously as he unwrapped it. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf, her first attempt at the craft, taught to her by a leaner, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper. Gabriel unfolded the paper, reading the simple message written there. His expression transformed from curiosity to wonder to pure joy in the span of seconds. "Fiona," he breathed, looking up at her with eyes suddenly bright with emotion. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own eyes filling with happy tears. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Gabriel, in early summer." Gabriel gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "A baby," he repeated in awe. "Our child. Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Gabriel assured her, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me everything, Fiona. A home, a purpose, your love, and now a family of our own." They stayed up late into the night, talking about the future, making plans for the nursery, speculating about whether the baby would be a boy or a girl. As the clock struck midnight, marking the official start of Christmas Day, Gabriel knelt before Fiona where she sat in her favorite chair by the fire. "I have one more gift for you," he said, taking her hands in his. "It's not something I can wrap or put under a tree. It's a promise." "What kind of promise?" Fiona asked softly. "A promise that I will love you and our child with everything I am for all the days of my life. That I will strive every day to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. That I will remember, always, the gift you gave me when you agreed to share your life with mine." Tears slipped down Fiona's cheeks as she leaned forward to kiss him, pouring all her love and hope for their future into the gesture. And I promise to love you just as fiercely, Gabriel Reed. To be your partner in all things, to raise our child with the same courage and kindness that drew me to you from the beginning. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing their world in pristine white. Inside, warmed by the fire and by the love they had built together, Fiona and Gabriel held each other close, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment and filled with hope for all the moments still to come. The months that followed were a time of preparation and anticipation. As Fiona's body changed, accommodating the new life growing within her, Gabriel's protectiveness intensified. He insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch and a young woman from town to assist with household duties, despite Fiona's protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "Humor me," Gabriel requested when she objected to his hovering. "This is our first child." "Let me fuss a little." Fiona relented, secretly touched by his concern even as she chafed at some of the restrictions. She did, however, insist on continuing to teach until the final months of her pregnancy. "The children need consistency," she argued, "and I need to keep my mind active." On this point, Gabriel yielded, though he personally escorted her to and from town on teaching days, unwilling to let her make the journey alone in her condition. Spring arrived, bringing with it new foals in the pastures and the final preparations for the baby. The nursery, adjoining their bedroom, was painted a soft yellow suitable for either a boy or a girl. Eleanor had advised during one of her frequent visits. A cradle, handcrafted by Thomas as a gift for his first grandchild, stood ready beside a rocking chair positioned to catch the morning light. As her time grew closer, Fiona found herself increasingly reflective, often thinking back to that first encounter with Gabriel in the meadow. One particularly fine May afternoon, she felt drawn to visit the spot again. "I'd like to walk to the east meadow," she told Gabriel over lunch. "Would you come with me?" Concern immediately creased his brow. "Are you sure that's wise? It's quite a distance in your condition." "We could ride partway," Fiona suggested, "and walk the rest. I promise I'll be careful." Unable to deny her anything when she looked at him with such pleading eyes, Gabriel agreed. They set out an hour later, riding at a gentle pace until they reached the edge of the meadow where they had first met nearly 2 years earlier. The grass was high again, dotted with wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. Gabriel helped Fiona dismount, his hands lingering protectively at her waist. Together, they walked to the center of the meadow, where Fiona paused, a nostalgic smile playing on her lips. "I was standing right about here," she recalled. "I'd taken off my boots because the grass felt so wonderful between my toes, and then I looked up and saw you watching me from the tree line. The most beautiful sight I'd ever seen," Gabriel said softly. A woman totally at ease with herself and the world around her. Fiona smiled, then winced slightly as the baby delivered a particularly energetic kick. Gabriel's hand immediately went to her rounded belly, his expression one of wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Active today," he observed. "Always," Fiona confirmed with a rueful smile. "Especially when I'm trying to rest." Gabriel knelt suddenly before her, his face level with her belly. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father speaking. Your mother would appreciate it if you'd settle down a bit." Fiona laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "I don't think he or she is listening." "Worth a try." Gabriel stood, wrapping his arms around her as best he could with her belly between them. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "Not in the last hour or so," Fiona teased, a serious oversight on my part. He kissed her gently. "I love you, Fiona Reed, more today than yesterday, and less than tomorrow," she finished for him, their personal ritual. "And I love you." They stood together in the meadow where their story had begun, the warm spring sun bathing them in golden light, the future stretching before them full of promise. The baby arrived 2 weeks later, after a labor that left Gabriel pacing the hallway in agony, while Fiona faced her own battle within their bedroom, attended by the local midwife and a leaner. When the first cry pierced the night, Gabriel froze mid-step, his heart seeming to stop and then restart with renewed purpose. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the bedroom door finally opened, and a leaner emerged, her face tired but radiant. "Congratulations, Gabriel," she said warmly. "You have a beautiful daughter." A daughter. The word echoed in Gabriel's mind as he entered the bedroom on legs that suddenly felt unsteady. Fiona lay propped against pillows, her face pale but triumphant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her smile more brilliant than he had ever seen it. "Come meet your daughter," she invited softly. Gabriel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering at the tiny face nestled against Fiona's breast. A shock of dark hair, impossibly small features, perfectly formed fingers curled into a tight fist. She was miraculous. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to touch her cheek with a tentative finger. "Just like her mother. Would you like to hold her?" Gabriel hesitated. "She's so small." "What if I hurt her?" "You won't," Fiona assured him, carefully transferring the baby to his arms. The weight of his daughter, so light and yet so profound, settled against his chest, and Gabriel felt something shift within him, a fierce protectiveness unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I've been waiting a long time to meet you." Fiona watched them together, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain the emotion. "What shall we call her?" she asked. They had discussed names but had never settled on a final choice. Gabriel studied the baby's face thoughtfully. "Grace," he suggested after a moment. "Grace Elena Reed." "Grace," Fiona repeated, testing the name. It felt right, a recognition of the blessing they had been given, a connection to the freedom and ease she had always sought. "It's perfect." The days and weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment as they learned to care for their daughter. Grace proved to be a generally contented baby, though she had definite opinions about when she should be fed and held. Gabriel threw himself into fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything, often taking Grace from Fiona in the middle of the night so his wife could rest. One night, when Grace was about a month old, Fiona woke to find Gabriel's side of the bed empty. Concerned, she rose and followed the sound of his voice to the nursery. There she found him by the window, Grace cradled in his arms while he pointed out the stars to her. "That bright one there is the North Star," he was saying softly. "Sailors and travelers have used it to find their way home for thousands of years. But you, Grace Reed, you'll never need it for that purpose. Because home will always be right here, with people who love you more than their own lives." Fiona leaned against the doorframe, unwilling to interrupt the moment. This was the man she had married, tender and strong, capable of building a ranch with his bare hands and of holding their daughter with infinite gentleness. Gabriel must have sensed her presence because he looked up, a smile spreading across his face. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said. "She was fussing and I thought you deserved the sleep." "I don't mind," Fiona assured him, crossing the room to join them. "I love seeing you with her." Gabriel shifted Grace to one arm so he could wrap the other around Fiona, drawing her against his side. Together, they looked down at their daughter, now sleeping peacefully, her tiny face relaxed in complete trust. "You remember what I said to you that first day?" Gabriel asked softly. "About marrying you just as you were," Fiona nodded, smiling at the memory. "It was the most outrageous thing anyone had ever said to me. And yet here we are." His arm tightened around her. I knew then, somehow, that you were the one I'd been waiting for all my life." "I think I knew too," Fiona admitted. "I just didn't want to admit it. It seemed too fast, too certain." And now, she looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, at the eyes that still looked at her with the same wonder they had that first day. "Now I know that some things are meant to be. That sometimes two people find each other across all the vastness of the world and everything else just falls into place." Gabriel bent to kiss her, a gesture filled with tenderness and promise. "I love you, Fiona Reed." "And I love you," she replied. "More today than yesterday. And less than tomorrow." They finished together, sealing the words with another kiss while their daughter slept peacefully between them. The newest chapter in a story that had begun with a chance encounter in a meadow and would continue for all the days of their lives. As the years passed, the Reed Ranch flourished, as did their family. Grace was joined by a brother, Thomas Gabriel, 2 years later, and eventually by another sister, Lily, 3 years after that. The house that Gabriel had built for them expanded to accommodate their growing family. But its heart remained the same, a home filled with love, laughter, and the freedom to be exactly who they were. Fiona continued teaching, though she limited herself to 1 day a week once all 3 children were born. She also wrote articles for newspapers back east about life in the Wyoming territory, her perspectives on education, and the changing role of women in the West. Several of her pieces were published in prestigious journals, bringing her a modest fame that both amused and pleased her. Gabriel's horse breeding operation became renowned throughout the region, his animals sought after for their intelligence, strength, and gentle temperaments. He traveled occasionally to deliver special horses or to attend livestock shows, but he always returned as quickly as possible to the family that was the center of his world. The children grew strong and independent, each with their own personality and talents. Grace showed an early aptitude for numbers, like her mother, while Thomas inherited his father's way with horses. Lily, the youngest, revealed a gift for music that prompted Gabriel to hire a proper piano teacher to visit the ranch weekly, supplementing Fiona's basic instruction. Through it all, Gabriel and Fiona's partnership deepened and strengthened. They faced challenges together: drought years that threatened the ranch, a severe illness that nearly took Thomas from them when he was 5, the natural tensions that arise in any marriage. But they faced them as they had from the beginning, side by side, drawing strength from each other. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Gabriel surprised Fiona with a special gift: a trip back east to visit the museums, theaters, and libraries she had sometimes wondered about in their early days together. For 2 months, they explored New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, reveling in the cultural opportunities but also confirming what they had always known, that their true home was the ranch they had built together in Wyoming. "Did you ever regret it?" Gabriel asked as their train carried them back west, the urban landscapes giving way to the vast openness of the plains. Not seeing more of the world before settling down, Fiona considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I've had adventures of my own making. I've raised 3 remarkable children. I've built a life with a man who loves me exactly as I am." She took his hand, still strong but now bearing the marks of 2 decades of hard work. "What about you? Did you ever regret proposing to a barefoot stranger in a meadow?" Gabriel's laugh was as warm and genuine as it had been 20 years earlier. "Not for a single moment. It was the best impulsive decision I ever made." As they approached their station, Fiona looked out at the familiar landscape, the rolling prairie giving way to the foothills and mountains beyond. Somewhere ahead lay their ranch, their children, the life they had created together. "Home," she said softly. Gabriel squeezed her hand. Home, he agreed. Where we belong. That evening, with the children grown enough to understand the significance, they gathered the family for a celebration not just of their anniversary, but of the journey they had taken together. Under a sky scattered with stars, in the very meadow where they had first met, Gabriel and Fiona renewed the vows they had made 2 decades earlier. "I promise to continue loving you," Gabriel said, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air, "just as you are. The woman who stands barefoot in the grass. The woman who challenges me, supports me, and makes every day an adventure." "And I promise to love you," Fiona responded, "the man who saw me truly saw me from the very beginning, who gave me the freedom to be myself and the security to know I was cherished." As their children watched, Grace, now a young woman of 19, Thomas, a lanky 17-year-old, and Lily, a precocious 14, Gabriel and Fiona sealed their renewed commitment with a kiss that held all the passion of their youth and all the depth of their shared history. Later, as the celebration continued at the house with friends and neighbors joining them, Gabriel found Fiona standing alone on the porch, looking out at the land that had been the backdrop to their life together. "Happy?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Fiona leaned into him, fitting perfectly against his side as she always had. "Completely," she assured him. "You, more than I ever dreamed possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for these 20 years, Fiona Reed, for our children, for our life together. Thank you for seeing something in a barefoot woman that even she didn't fully recognize," Fiona replied softly. "And for loving me exactly as I was and as I am." They stood together in the gathering dusk, the sounds of celebration drifting from the house behind them, the future still unfolding before them, a future they would continue to build together, step by step, day by day, with the same love and commitment that had begun with a chance encounter in a meadow where a woman stood barefoot in the grass, and a cowboy said, "I'd marry you like that, just as you are."